The VTC meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in Somalia. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Somalia to participate in this meeting. It is so decided.
Madam President, we have lost your sound.
Apologies. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in the meeting. Mr. James Swan, Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Somalia. Mr. Francisco Caetano Jose Madera, Special Representative of the Chairperson of the African Union Commission for Somalia and Head of the African Union Mission in Somalia. Ms. Zainab Hassan, Founder and Chairperson of Somali Gender Equity Movement. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Agenda Item 2. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2020-1113, the report of the Secretary General on the situation in Somalia. I now give the floor to Mr. James Swan. Mr. Swan, the floor is yours.
Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, thank you for the opportunity again to update you on the situation in Somalia. I'm especially pleased to speak to you today, along with the Somali Prime Minister, His Excellency Mohamed Hussein Roble, as well as the founder and chair of the Somali Gender Equity Movement, Ms. Zainab Hassan, and the special representative of the chairperson of the African Union Commission, my dear friend and colleague, Ambassador Francisco Madera. We meet as Somalia faces critical decisions, an electoral process to choose the parliament and president in the coming few months, a security transition so that Somalis can assume lead security responsibility by the end of 2021, and urgent priorities for humanitarian response and economic reforms. Madam President, when I last addressed this Council in August, the Somali leadership was meeting to agree a plan for the 2020-2021 elections. In September, we agreed on an indirect electoral model, ending a 2-year political stalemate between the federal government and federal member states. The agreed model of voting, regrettably, fell short of the constitutional requirement for direct universal suffrage election of parliament. Yet, the agreement reflected wide Somali political consensus and ownership. In addition to the support of the president and federal member state leaders, the indirect model was also endorsed by other key Somali stakeholders, including political parties and civil society, and was ratified by the federal parliament. Going forward, this broad political consensus must now be preserved and indeed deepened as the agreement is implemented. The agreed process must be conducted in a fair, transparent, broadly accepted, and peaceful manner. And it must be more participatory and inclusive than it was 4 years ago. We welcome the political leaders' agreement to ensure the 30% women's quota for seats in Parliament, and we urge full respect for this commitment. The electoral schedule foresees selection of members of the two houses of the federal parliament by the end of December, and election of the federal president by the new parliament in February 2021. Nominations to the electoral management bodies were several weeks behind schedule, and they remain the subject of some contention. Also pending is finalization of the electoral security plan to ensure that the elections are as safe and secure as possible and minimize the risk that al-Shabaab may disrupt or influence the process. In support of these Somali-led efforts, UNSOM plans to contribute to implementation of the electoral agreement within the scope of its mandate and in collaboration with UNDP, UNSOS, and international partners. We will also continue efforts toward universal suffrage elections in the future. To this end, we urge Somali leaders to prepare consensually a roadmap with clear timelines and benchmarks to ensure one person, one vote elections take place in 2024-25. Madam President, in September, President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo appointed Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble, who subsequently named his cabinet. The new government has a challenging task before it, not only to steer the country through the electoral process, but also to pursue the reform agenda across the political, security, and economic spectrum. The UN in Somalia stands ready to support the government in advancing these national priorities. I commend Somali leaders for their spirit of compromise in reaching agreement between the federal government and federal member states. This spirit must now be sustained. Beyond elections, we also urge further progress through consensus on other democratic reforms, including the constitutional review process, the establishment of the Judicial Services Commission, the Human Rights Commission, and Constitutional Court as examples. Political dialogue is also key to addressing other pressing priorities, including operations against al-Shabaab, economic and security reforms, and collaboration to tackle the multiple humanitarian challenges facing the country. We encourage political actors to institutionalize this dialogue among leaders, such as through the newly formed National Consultative Forum. To promote such dialogue, I have recently begun a series of visits to federal member state capitals, joined by SRCC Madeira and representatives of the European Union and Intergovernmental Authority on Development. I understand that Prime Minister Roble has also started a tour of the regions to engage with state leaders to continue dialogue, and I welcome this initiative. Madam President, the security situation in Somalia remains of concern, with persistent attacks by al-Shabaab, which remains the primary threat to Somalia's security. Continued efforts at protecting the Somali people and degrading al-Shabaab's capabilities must be the main objective of the national security forces, as well as AMISOM and other security partners, in particular as we enter the sensitive electoral period. Next year will be a transition year in which Somalia takes lead responsibility on security matters. This requires agreement on a strategic vision for Somalia's security, involving all security stakeholders. The federal government has already started this work as it is drafting an updated Somalia transition plan. It is crucial that this plan address many long-standing challenges, including the need for realistic operational objectives, credible plans for force generation, and clear coordination structures. The updated transition plan will serve as a baseline for further discussions in the coming months that will guide the role of Somali security forces as well as external actors.
Brian, could we please pause?
Allow me, before I go on to the next briefer, Mr. Madera, allow me to, given that my mic was muted when I first announced Rule 37, allow me to extend a warm welcome to the distinguished Prime Minister of Somalia, His Excellency, Mr. Mohamed Hussein Robo, who will address us under Rule 37. I now give the floor to Mr. Francesco Caetano Jose Madera.
Madam President, Excellencies, thank you for the opportunity to brief the Security Council on Somalia once again. Allow me at the outset to congratulate you and St. Vincent and the Grenadines on its presidency of the Security Council for the month of November. Let me also express my satisfaction. Madam, if you don't mind, I see that Ambassador Swan is back. Maybe you could go back to him.
Yes, I think so, since you are not far into your statement. Thank you very much, Mr. Madera. Mr. Swan, could you pick up from where you left off, please? Thank you, Mr. Madera. Mr. Swan,
yes, indeed. Thank you, and I can hear you all now, so thank you very much. I apologize for any disruption earlier. Next year will be a transition year in which Somalia takes lead responsibility on security matters. This requires agreement on a strategic vision for Somalia's security, involving all security stakeholders. The federal government has already started this work as it is drafting an updated Somalia transition plan. It is crucial that this plan address many long-standing challenges, including the need for realistic operational objectives, credible plans for force generation, and clear coordination structures. The updated transition plan will serve as a baseline for further discussions in the coming months to guide the role of Somali security forces as well as external actors, including AMISOM, the UN, and bilateral security partners. I welcome the Prime Minister's announced plan to convene in early December the Executive Committee of the Comprehensive Approach to Security, also known as the Security and Justice Committee. I pay tribute to the Somali security forces and the African Union mission in Somalia for their steadfast and courageous pursuit of peace and stability in Somalia. We also welcome the continuing support and commitment from many member states to the development of Somalia's rule of law and security sector. It is through collective gains in the security realm that space is created for the political process, governance, and institution building. Human rights and justice remain at the center of our work for Somalia's development. With elections approaching, I underscore my previous calls for the protection of political space, for tolerance of divergent opinions, for respect of free speech and association, and for media freedom. I reiterate concerns over the recent increase in instances of sexual violence against women and girls, and over the regressive legislation relating to sexual rights and freedoms that have entered the parliamentary process in both Mogadishu and Hargeisa, and which contravene international standards. Madam President, humanitarian needs remain acute. The country has been hard hit by the triple shock of COVID-19, flooding, and locust infestation. The national trends in COVID-19 cases are broadly favorable, but we must remain vigilant. I again commend Somali authorities for their rapid response to COVID-19's outbreak and thank Somali health workers who are on the front lines to defeat the pandemic. I welcome the new 5-year Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework between the Somali federal government and the UN, which will guide UN support for Somali-owned and Somali-led development priorities. The framework aligns with Somalia's 9th National Development Plan. We urge the government to remain steadfast in its commitment to the reform agenda in order to make progress on the heavily indebted Poor Countries Initiative benchmarks to reach completion point. We look forward to the upcoming Somalia Partnership Forum announced by the Prime Minister for early December to take stock of progress since last year and agree on priorities for the future. Madam President, in closing, let me assure the Council of UNSOM's ongoing engagement with Somali stakeholders to promote political cooperation in the interest of the country. Our good offices are aimed at fostering the widest levels of inclusion and consensus possible. As the country focuses on the electoral process, the UN in Somalia will continue to press for participation by historically underrepresented groups, among them women, youth, and marginalized communities. They all have much to contribute to peace, stability, and development in their country. The coming months will set the course of Somalia for the next several years. At this critical time, I'm grateful for the Council's support as our United Nations team strives to help Somalia's leaders and people achieve their national priorities. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Swan for his briefing, and I now give the floor to Mr. Francisco Caetano Jose Madera.
Madam President, once again, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to once again address this August Council, Security Council. Allow me also, on the outset, to congratulate you, Madam President, and your country, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, on its presidency of the Security Council for the month of November. Madam President, it is a great pleasure to see Prime Minister Roble here with us and to brief you. We meet at an important moment of Somalia's journey towards inclusive politics, reconciliation, and democratization. Last August, as Ambassador James Swan and I were briefing this council, Somali leaders converged in the central town of Dusamareb to discuss issues of national interest, amongst which, and notably, the upcoming federal parliamentary and presidential elections. The Mogadishu 17 September Compromise Agreement that came out of the Dusamareb process was the culmination of protracted and painstaking dialogue and negotiations fraught with challenges and uncertainties, where steadfastness, patience, compromise, and determination to remain at the negotiating table for as long as it took was rewarded with important consensuses that were reached, paving the way for elections preparation process to begin under a relatively improved 2016 indirect election model. The agreement and the electoral model were welcomed and received support from all parts of Somalia. They were overwhelmingly endorsed by both houses of the federal parliament, the main opposition political parties, the most representative civil society organizations, all former presidents and business operators. Subsequently, a new prime minister was appointed in the person of His Excellency Mohamed Hussein Roble, who immediately formed his cabinet. We in AMISOM, Madam President, are greatly encouraged by the dynamism and commitment to duty being demonstrated by the Prime Minister and his cabinet, particularly as he invests time and effort to put the agreed electoral mechanisms in place and accelerate the constitutional review process. The African Union welcomes these positive developments and stands ready to offer the support the new Prime Minister needs to advance Somalia's immediate priorities, particularly conducting free, fair, inclusive, and secure elections. Madam President, the need to conclude the constitutional debate aimed at drafting a shared national vision of the direction the country should take. The work the government is undertaking towards national reconciliation, the effort at resolving the issues related to land, power sharing and resource sharing, extreme poverty, clan dynamics, governance and institutional weaknesses, radicalization, insurgency, violent extremism and terrorism demand repeated formal and informal encounters and discussions amongst political stakeholders, like those discussions that took place in Dusamarebe and Mogadishu last August and September, in order to elicit synergies required to build the much needed trust and confidence amongst the leadership and create an environment where consensus can emerge and approaches can be agreed on how to adequately tackle the problems facing Somalia today and find them a sustainable and lasting solution. That's why, Madam President, we welcomed in a very particular way the crucially important political meetings of Dusamareb and Mogadishu, which we earnestly supported and encouraged. We want this to continue. We want this to take the center stage in every dispute in Somalia. It is therefore important and necessary that the Dusamareb spirit continues to be harnessed and made to prevail during the implementation of the electoral processes, and ensure that the current challenges over the constitution and appointment modalities for the electoral commissions and others do not stand on the way of or hinder the already agreed timeline, a timely indirect parliamentary and presidential elections. As part of my engagement on elections, I have continued to advocate for the African Union's desire to see a full participation of Somali women in the upcoming elections, maintaining the 30% quota. Achieving the quota is an issue of great importance to the African Union, more so as this month we have been globally commemorating the 20th anniversary of Security Council Resolution 1325, and in Somalia, when AMISOM has celebrated the strength, courage, and perseverance of Somali women in their contribution to peace building for the past many years. To this end, I call once again on Somali leaders to give strength and meaning to full women involvement and participation in the forthcoming elections. Madam President, Security Council Resolution 2472, 2019, and 2520, 2020 have give the African Union a critical role in supporting the federal government to prepare and conduct peaceful elections. While this is mainly in the area of election security, the forthcoming election have been one of AMISOM's top priority. And building on the experience that our mission has accumulated in 2016, I can now, Madam, report that our preparations are at an advanced stage as we await the finalization and announcement of the dates for parliamentary and presidential elections. I can equally report that in terms of what AMISOM has accomplished since my last briefing, our preparations and support cuts across our multidimensional nature as a mission. With regards to our uniformed personnel, this has seen increased support to the Somali police force with the provision of election training, security materials, or budget and training schedules. Recently, AMISOM, together with the United Nations, supported the FGS revision of the electoral security concept of operations, which has since been adopted by the Somali authorities. This is part of the effort to ensure that security plans are adjusted and compatible with the adopted electoral model of electoral constituency caucuses. Looking ahead, AMISOM's police will soon begin training and mentoring their Somali counterparts on the operationalization of regional joint operation centers across the federal member states that will plan, coordinate, deliver, and manage security operations throughout the period of the electoral process. This will also include a dedicated AMISOM female officer to support the Somali police force, manning of an election women's desk. This week, our uniformed personnel are set to begin a gender-based election violence training course for both the Somali police force and members of the civil society. Also, complementing our uniformed personnel, AMISOM civilian component this month have focused on drafting and contributing to the planning of an election security communication strategy for public information security. Beyond this important support role, our civilian staff have held a series of thematic election workshops, including exploring proposals and initiatives to promote Somali women's participation in the upcoming elections. Madam President, Al-Shabaab remains the principal threat to peace and security in Somalia, with the group placing a greater emphasis on destabilizing Mogadishu, mainly through attacks on high-profile targets. Beyond Mogadishu, in AMISOM areas of operation, we have observed the emergence of a clear threat picture. Our threat picture strongly indicates that Al-Shabaab's primary focus since August has been to enhance its capability through training and at times by enlisting foreign expertise as part of the group's knowledge transfer from foreign extremist affiliates groups. Such training and knowledge transfer have enabled Al-Shabaab's probing attacks, bolstered by its ability to mobilize quickly. We also have, with grave concern, Madam President, during November, seen the group turn particular focus on targeting aircrafts on takeoff and landing in forward operating bases. Luckily, all attempts so far undertaken have missed the target. We therefore need to pay focused attention to these emerging trends. Last September, to expand transition activities to Galmudug, AMISOM and Somali security forces deployed into Samareb launched a targeted operation in the area of Bulakli. This not only resulted in the disruption of Al-Shabaab activities there, but also the seizure of several weapons. More recently, in October, AMISOM, jointly with SNA in Irshabelle, successfully conducted a targeted operation in El Baraf, leading to the capture of Al-Shabaab operatives and weapons. As AMISOM's partnered military operations have continued, AMISOM's civilian stabilization activities have progressed too. With the space created, AMISOM has not only provided COVID-19 PPE to various communities in proximity to recovered territory, but this fact allowed AMISOM civilians to deliver training and essential services. The services include the delivery of clean water to the population through the digging of shallow wells. While in Jubaland, the mission has responded with the provision of maternal care facilities and constructed a childbirth delivery facility. Madam President, regarding the Somalia Transition Plan review, the African Union is pleased that current draft has progressed from its initial text in September. AMISOM has also been fully engaged throughout the process in all three key work groups of operations, capacity and institutional building, and support activities, including stabilization. The AMISOM Sector Commanders Conference, which took place during the course of the revision of the transition plan, was able to benefit from the FGS identification and definition of its priorities in the operational pillar for the remaining period of the transition. The African Union Operations Coordination Committee, which recently met at the Foreign Affairs Ministers level, is eagerly looking forward to a consolidated, realistic, and implementable text of the revised plan, which captures all the requisite operational as well as capacity building and supporting tasks. Madam President, besides reaffirming the letter and content of AU Peace and Security Council Communique 949, the ministers concluded that the African Union should begin to facilitate a process for the conduct of an independent assessment, commencing with the appointment of an independent African high-level expert and a technical team to support the process that will focus on Somali security requirements, broader stabilization needs, as well as efforts to extend and consolidate state authority throughout the country, commencing with the already liberated areas. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank Mr. Madera for his briefing, and I now give the floor to Ms. Zainab Hassan. Ms. Hassan, the floor is yours.
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by thanking St. Vincent Grenadines for inviting me to brief the Council and take this opportunity to warmly congratulate you, Madam, for presiding over the Council this month. I also acknowledge the presence of my Prime Minister, His Excellency Mohamed Hussein Roble, Special Representative of the Secretary General for Somalia, James Swan, and the Special Representative of the Chairperson of the African Union Commission for Somalia, Ambassador Francisco Madera. Excuse me. It's a great honor for me to address the Security Council as a representative of the civil society in Somalia on women's participation in all aspects of the society in Somalia, in particular, women's political participation and some of the work of the Somali gender equity movement. My name is Zainab Hassan. I'm the founder and chairwoman of Somali Gender Equity Movement, a long-time human rights and social justice and gender equity activist. I'm also one of the experts that developed the National Reconciliation Framework for the Ministry of Interior, Federal Affairs, and Reconciliation. Madam President, Somali women are striving to be active in social, economic, and political aspects of all Somali society, despite the institutional and cultural barriers. Women's role in peace building is not a secret, often crossing boundaries of warring clans, demonstrating for peace, and reciting poetry to promote peace and reconciliation. Despite UNHCR 1325, which calls for women's inclusion into peace building, peacekeeping, reconciliation, humanitarian response, and in post-conflict reconstruction, Somali women have been largely absent from these processes. Without women's full presence at the table, where decisions are being made, Somalia will not be able to attain sustainable peace and create a just society based on the rule of law. Because of time constraints, I'm unable to cover women's participation in all parts of the society. But since the focus of my briefing is women's participation in the political arena, I will briefly touch on women's education empowerment and participation in Somalia's economic sphere, which has direct correlation with political participation. Education is an important key to the development of skilled and productive human resources and for enhancing the formation of human capital for Somalia's quest for economic development and a better future. Girls have made significant gains in being educated and literacy rates has steadily been increasing. While girls have an 83% enrollment in elementary education, their number is significantly reduced as they get older and pulled out of school to help their families or even become child brides. This situation is even worse for rural, nomadic, and IDP girls and women who may not have access to schools or the means to pay for it. The Somali government should allocate more budget to public education to increase access and develop policies to reduce dropout rates and improve the quality of education. The United Nations and international community can invest in education programs and initiatives like the Bar Amma Baro, meaning learn and read, a partnership project between USAID Somalia and the Minister of Education aimed at increasing student enrollment and is investing in girls' education, safety, and health. President, women's economic contribution is very clear as women make up a substantial number in micro and small-sized enterprises. However, women's absence in the medium and large-sized enterprises is noteworthy. This is mostly due to investment in women-owned businesses from their families and institutions having difficult to access loans. Thus, sociocultural, financial, and structural barriers limit women's economic empowerment. It's important to note that women have been increasingly making inroads into male-dominated sectors such as livestock, fishery, farming, and petroleum imports sectors. But this needs to be more systemic support for women's business. There are gaps in knowledge regarding the institutional and cultural barriers to women's productive work. More research needs to be done to better understand the role and position of women in the Somali economy, disaggregated by socioeconomic status, region, and sector. Madam President, Somalia is at a critical juncture at the time, as the mandate of the federal parliament ends on December 28, 2020, and that of the executive branch on February 2021. Somali women and civil society welcomed the efforts of the National Leaders Council, ending the long-standing political impasse and agreeing on an enhanced 2016 indirect electoral model. We welcome the agreement guarantees the 30% quota for women, but much needs to be done to achieve that milestone. Experience of the 2012 federal elections taught us that when there is no enforcement mechanism attached to the 30% quota, agreement compared to 2016 indirect election where there were provisions. In 2012, women obtained 14% of the seats, while in 2016, women received 24% in the parliament. Though the minimum 30% quota for women was never achieved, the significant increase in women's representation can be attributed to a concerted advocacy and lobbying campaigns of women, civil society organizations, movements, and groups in collaboration with the Goodwill Ambassadors Committee, and the prayer and support of the UN and key international community members. Somali Gender Equity Movement an organic movement founded in 2012 with close to 9,000 online members in Somalia and in the diaspora, was at the forefront, highlighting, educating, organizing, and promoting Somali women's political participation and representation. The specific focus on how to attain the 30% quota for women. In 2016 electoral process. After identifying the key challenges facing Somali women and the best approach to increase women's participation and representation in governance, a more comprehensive, effective, and targeted advocacy campaign revolved around the 2016 elections under the banner of Wihil Hawenka, Stand with Somali Women campaign, and the hashtag Gabdagul Woman Win, which is still widely used in social media. Somali women faced many obstacles during the electoral process. For instance, an opposition to the quota for women came from the religious leaders, traditional elders, and male politicians. If women are not reserved, it would have been extremely difficult to obtain the 24% in the parliament. Limited access to financial resources remains a major barrier to women's participation in the electoral process. It's a common knowledge that there are a strong correlation between access to financial resources and political participation. Many women candidates were unable to generate the financial resources needed to compete in political campaigns and lobbying, including registration fees. Therefore, female candidates' registration fees were reduced by 50% compared to their male counterparts to promote and encourage women's political participation. But this is not enough. Empowering women economically is pivotal so they can be well positioned to compete in the political arena. Somali women need to get targeted support in building their political economy and create opportunities for investment in a systemic way to build on and sustain previous gains and achieve the minimum 30% quota for women in the 2020 indirect election. Somali women politicians, aspirants, human rights defenders, activists, civil society organizations are concerned about the upcoming 2020 election. Excuse me. And how the quota for women will be guaranteed, since there is no mechanism developed for its implementation. And no committee like the 2016 Goodwill Ambassadors to oversee have been appointed. It's not clear whether women will pay the same high registration fee of $20,000 for the upper house and $10,000 for the lower house, or double of what they have paid in 2016. The pushback against women is across the board, and the steep decline of women seats in all the federal member parliaments, with the exception of Jubaland, is concerning as an indication for the upcoming 2020 election. It's alarming that no woman is among the appointed 3 members per federal member state representing the federal government in the federal member states' electoral management committees. In addition, the appointed Federal Electoral Implementation Committee to oversee the implementation of the electoral process and the Independent Dispute Resolution Mechanism team both fall short of the agreed 30% quota for women. Experience taught us that community leaders could make a difference in promoting gender equity and upholding the rights of women. As a civil society, we call on the National Consultative Council to honor their agreement on guaranteeing the quota for women in the parliament. We also call on the federal government, political parties, opposition groups, and civil society to work together on election security, corruption issues, and toward a fair and free election leading to a peaceful transfer of power. We also call on UN Security Council to closely monitor and pressure the different groups. We expect the Security Council to urge UNSOM, UN agencies, and international community partners to closely collaborate with the government and monitor the development of necessary mechanisms to implement the agreed electoral model to achieve women's rights, representation, and safe and secure election in 2020. It's encouraging that cross-sector women's rights activists, women political aspirants, and civil society in the country and in the diaspora are organizing to start advocacy campaigns despite the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic that has impacted social, economic, health, and well-being of families, and funding streams for civil society organizations and the way we operate. Also, many well-educated, experienced, and active women of different ages are candidates for the 2020 parliamentary election, and we hope many of them will win. I would like to close my briefing with a positive note that the Women's Charter for Somalia that calls for 50% representation of women in all three levels of government and on the socio-economic sector in the country, as well as greater protection for women's rights and zero tolerance for sexual and gender-based violence, including female genital mutilation, has been launched by Galmudug and Southwest states. Thank you so very much.
I thank Ms. Hassan for her briefing, and I also ask her to please take care of that cough. I will now give the floor to those council members who may wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and my thanks as ever to our briefers, to SRSG Swan, to Ambassador Madeira, and also to Ms. Hassan for that really useful and detailed update. Madam President, regrettably, I must open on a somber note, because despite the Secretary-General's calls for a ceasefire, Al-Shabaab continue to launch their attacks. We strongly condemn all terrorist attacks, including the murder of 2 humanitarian workers just last month. The UK expresses its condolences to victims' families and reaffirms its solidarity with Somalia in fighting terrorism. Let me reiterate, it is vital that all parties ensure unimpeded access and safety of aid workers in line with international humanitarian law. Madam President, as we near the end of the current political cycle, I would like to reflect on Somalia's progress, and there has been progress. In March this year, Somalia achieved heavily indebted poor country HIPC debt relief. They achieved this decision point after impressive economic reforms and can now access new international finance. The federal government has increased its revenue base. With international support, Somalia is making progress in building resilience to humanitarian shocks. And with support from AMISOM, the Somali National Army has taken back and held territory from Al-Shabaab. This is a marathon, not a sprint, but at the moment, we're making progress. As the electoral processes commence in Somalia, we acknowledge the federal government and member states' agreement on an electoral model for 2020-21 and stress the importance of preserving this spirit of consensus. We now urge all stakeholders to work together to deliver an inclusive, timely, and credible electoral process, which includes a 30% quota for women. And I want to just reiterate to Ms. Hassan how useful it was to hear from her on how civil society's activity on this is working to achieve this target, but also the challenges that they still face. Madam President, I want to express deep concern about the growing number of attacks on freedom of expression, including the killing, assault, and intimidation of journalists. As Somalia prepares to hold an electoral process, Somali leaders must ensure political space remains open allowing the expression of a diversity of voices. Beyond this electoral process, commitment to effective federalism is critical for Somalia's long-term stability. Building institutions of state and ensuring resources and power can be distributed in a way that best serves the Somali people. We urge Somalia's leaders to set out their vision for steps towards an inclusive political settlement, finalizing the constitution and ensuring direct elections in 2024-25. We encourage them to maximize the benefits of debt relief through better federal economic cooperation, and we urge Somali's leaders to continue to articulate a clear vision for the security transition after 2021. As we enter the next political cycle, Somalia and the international community should recommit to principles of mutual accountability. The United Kingdom reaffirms its support and commitment to Somalia's long-term stability and growth. I turn again now to the security situation in Somalia, which remains a significant challenge. Firstly, I would like to restate our tribute to the continuing commitment and sacrifices of AMISOM troop contributing countries and to Somalia's security forces. We welcome the renewal of the Somalia sanctions regime and the international resolve to counter al-Shabaab through tackling their access to arms and illicit finance. We express deep concern about the worrying statistics on children and armed conflict and sexual and gender-based violence in Somalia. We welcome the tasking in UNSOM and sanctions mandates to report on human rights. All tools must be used to ensure people do not suffer. And we welcome also the efforts by the federal government to renew the Somalia transition plan. The deadline at the end of 2021 for Somalian authorities to take greater leadership from AMISOM is a momentous one. Our partners in the African Union and the AMISOM TCCs have made enormous sacrifices in supporting Somalia as it works to retake control of its own security. It is clear this support will be needed after 2021. But it's also clear we have an opportunity to support AMISOM as it evolves towards a role where it can enable the Somalis to manage their own security. International conversations, including the upcoming EU conference on security and critically the independent assessment mandated by this Council, are necessary for partners to reflect on how we can collectively implement Somalia's security vision. I encourage constructive engagement with these processes as we come to renew AMISOM's mandate next year. Finally, Madam President, Somalia faces a protracted climate and conflict-induced humanitarian crisis, compounded by what SRSG Swan called the triple shock of COVID-19, locusts, and floods. The United Kingdom gave £64 million in humanitarian aid in the last financial year to Somalia. We call on the international community to provide more funding for the humanitarian response and efforts to build long-term resilience. Madam Chair, in conclusion, I want to emphasize 3 points. Firstly, a united international response is crucial to supporting Somalia in its fight against protracted humanitarian crises. Secondly, I reiterate our call for the federal government to ensure the agreed electoral process is inclusive, credible, and timely. And finally, that Somalia's long-term peace and stability depends on a clear plan for ensuring its security, a political vision for better federal cooperation, and continued international support and commitment to mutual accountability. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United States. Kelly, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. Special Representative Swan, we deeply appreciate your briefing here today and your efforts on the ground in Somalia. The United States supports the efforts of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Somalia and will continue to stand with the mission of Somalia and its people. The next months in Somalia are indeed particularly important for the future trajectory of the country. Constructive dialogue among Somali leaders over the last several months has led to the development of the electoral model. While we know the agreed-upon structure does not achieve the one person, one vote model most Somali people want, we are encouraged by the peaceful process that led to this agreement and the manner in which the federal government and member state governments used dialogue to reach it. We urge the FGS and the FMS to continue their dialogue and to achieve consensus on all electoral process matters, from the composition of electoral management bodies to Somaliland seats in Parliament. The United States strongly urges all concerned to hold firm to the 30% women's quota to which Somalia has committed. Finally, we encourage further consideration and the timely implementation of the draft National Election Security Plan, noting that the December 1st scheduled start of parliamentary elections is just days away. Madam President, conflict and terrorism remain serious impediments to Somalia's march toward long-term stability and development. The United States is committed to supporting African-led efforts to address the threats that impact not just Somalia, but the broader region. We condemn the strongest terms al-Shabaab's continued attacks on innocent Somalia citizens, humanitarian workers, government officials, and institutions. And we offer our sincere condolences to the families of those who lost their lives in the attack on November 17th in Mogadishu. With the government of Somalia's update to the Somalia Transition Plan, it is important that we fully support and cooperate with the work of the UN Security Council mandated independent assessment. We need to prepare for the February 2021 discussion on the AMISOM mandate to ensure that it is positioned to effectively meet mandate objectives and to enable Somalia to take greater security responsibilities. The United States continues to be concerned about al-Shabaab's ability to accrue large amounts of financing for its activities through illicit activities. Al-Shabaab continues to expand its revenue base through informal taxation and the manipulation of formal and informal institutions. Some reports indicate that al-Shabaab earns over $50 million per year through illegal means. We laud Somalia's recent progress on curbing terrorism finance and encourage them to continue their work with Somalia 751 panel of experts and its international partners. Unfortunately, the trifecta of COVID-19, extreme flooding, and severe locust infections have compounded Somalia's already complex humanitarian emergency. The United States is Somalia's largest humanitarian and development donor, including providing over $505 million in humanitarian assistance funding in the fiscal year 2020. This includes supplemental funding for both COVID and the locust responses. We remain steadfast in our support for the people of Somalia and call on others to do more. Madam President, we are encouraged by the efforts of Somali leadership to make progress on the country's re-entry into the international financial system. Somalia has implemented significant economic reforms in recent years and in March 2020 reached the first stage of debt relief through the heavily indebted Poor Countries Initiative. The United States, as a Paris Club member and Somalia's largest bilateral donor, has worked with the government to reduce and reschedule its decade-old U.S. loans. The United States is confident that Somalia is on a path towards stability and prosperity. Lastly, the United States would like to highlight the UN's ongoing and important work in preventing sexual and gender-based violence. We commend the efforts to ensure accountability and to train Somalia authorities on best practices. These efforts are making a real difference, and we applaud the shared commitment to tackling this terrible challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank the representative of the United
Madam President, thank you. Madam President, dear colleagues, I'd like to thank all of the briefers for their analysis, which have been very helpful in understanding the situation in Somalia. I'll make 3 points first. First, I'd like to start with the elections. While the recent electoral agreements reflect a dynamic of rapprochement between the federal Somalian government and the federated states, which is welcome, we do regret that the principle of one person, one vote was not retained and that most of the Somalians will not be able to participate directly in the vote. Our priority must, however, be to guarantee the credibility of the process in the timeline set and inclusivity. Full participation of women will be important, especially in this year of commemoration of the Agenda Women, Peace and Security. We would also call for participation of the young in keeping with Resolution 2535. My second point relates to the humanitarian and security situation. France is extremely concerned by this situation. Al-Shabaab is continuing its action, its murderous action against civilian populations, whose fate has been exacerbated by the pandemic and the ravages of climate change. And here, we're also referring to the locusts crisis and extreme climate conditions. In this context, France calls for access to humanitarian assistance for the people who need it and condemns attacks against humanitarian staff and healthcare workers, as well as any impediments to humanitarian access. We would call for full implementation of the conclusions of the working group with regard to armed conflict last August. Al-Shabaab is also aiming at the Somalian security forces and those that support them. Starting with AMISOM, France underscores here that the mission will have to undergo a major overhaul in 2021 in order to hand over to the Somalian security forces. In this regard, France fully supports General Santos Cruz's analysis and his team, who have been put in charge by the Security Council of undertaking an independent evaluation. He will be submitting his report in time on the 10th of January. Madam President, the fight against Al-Shabaab cannot just be on the security front. I also commend adoption of Resolution 2551, which renews the sanctions regime and strengthens the fight against Al-Shabaab financing. Fighting terrorism will be effective only in the context of support to governance and economic recovery for the country. This is a broad scope job in which the United Nations, the African Union, and the European Union have committed, and we must continue to work in this regard. We also support pursuing efforts to strengthen the state and lay down the foundation for democracy. Adoption of a constitutional review, respect of human rights, and fighting impunity are all key in order to build lasting peace. And in this regard, I commend the not recent appointment of a Somalian government, by the Somalian government, of a special prosecutor responsible for investigating attacks on journalists. Finally, the first and primary bulwark against terrorism is resilience of society. In this regard, France joins a number of observers who have indicated their concern with regard to legislative evolution undertaken in Somalia with regard to sexual violence, early marriage, and even forced marriage. This is a significant amount of ground lost, and it could further weaken society. Thank you.
The representative of France for her statement, and I now invite the representative of South Africa to make a statement.
Madam President, I would like to thank you for convening this important and timely meeting on the situation in Somalia. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the 3 African members of the Security Council, Niger, South Africa, and Tunisia, and our sister country in the Caribbean, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the A3+1. At the outset, this briefing takes place against the backdrop of Somalia embarking on a political milestone of holding the 2021 elections and having witnessed significant progress made by all Somali parties and leaders, especially with regard to electoral model, electoral timetable, and the procedures that will guide the implementation thereof. The A3+1 would like to thank Secretary General for his report on the situation in Somalia. We also like to thank the Special Representative of Secretary General and Head of United Nations Assistant Missions in Somalia, UNSOM, Mr. James Swan, and the Special Representative of the Chairperson of the African Union Commission for Somalia and Head of African Union Mission in Somalia, UNSOM, Mr. Francisco Madeira, and Ms. Zainab Hassan, founder and chairperson of Somalia Gender Equity Movement, for their briefing. Our special welcome to you, Your Excellency, Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble, to today's Security Council briefing. We are looking forward to your briefing on the latest development in Somalia. We commend everyone for their abiding commitment and effort to support the stabilization and continued state-building process in Somalia. The A3+1 statement will focus on 4 important issues and development in Somalia, namely political development, which includes the preparation for the elections, the security and humanitarian situation, as well as the role of United Nations and African Union missions. Madam President, on political development, Niger, Tunisia, South Africa, and commend the federal government of Somalia and federal member states for their recent important consultations and agreement reached, which constitute significant steps towards reaching a broad political consensus on key issues, particularly the holding of the 2021 general election. To this end, Mr. Prime Minister, we welcome the agreement reached by Somali leaders on the electoral model and timetable that will ensure that the general elections will be held as scheduled at the end of 2020 and early 2021. We are encouraged by the unveiling of the draft National Electoral Security Plan. It is a A3+1 hope and consistent view that the holding of the successful and secured elections in Somalia requires the full participation, sharing of information, coordination between police, military, AMISOM, and international partners. This will further demonstrate that Somalia is making notable progress in addressing its security concerns and to countenance the propaganda and destabilization efforts of armed groups. Similarly, A3+1 applaud all Somali political stakeholders, including civil society organizations, for their commitment towards consolidating democracy, in particular for ensuring the holding of the timely and credible elections, guaranteeing 30% quota for women representation in parliament, and the imperative to protect Somali sovereignty, independence, stability, and unity. We urge all stakeholders in Somalia to maintain this spirit of national ownership and cooperation going forward in all aspects in order to reach a broad-based agreement on critical matters such as advancing the aspiration of moving the country to 1%, 1 vote elections in future, concluding the drafting of the federal constitution and security arrangement and power sharing, among others. In this respect, the A3+1 congratulates His Excellency Mohamed Hussein Roble for your election as the Prime Minister of Somalia and your new inclusive and representative cabinet. We hope that this new government will continue building on the significant advances made by Somalia in the recent years on political, economic, and security priorities. Madam President, on the security situation, the A3+1 remain concerned about the continued volatile security situation in Somalia, Niger, Tunisia, South Africa, and civilians on the ground strongly condemn all attacks, in particular those carried out using improvised explosive devices and suicide vehicle home-borne improvised explosive devices by Al-Shabaab on Somalia civilian security forces, AMISOM, United Nations, and international community, including on critical infrastructure. We thus pay tribute to the ultimate sacrifice of AMISOM and Somali security forces in their quest to bring peace, stability, and development to Somalia. We underline that those responsible for these heinous crimes should not go unpunished. We reiterate our previous calls urging the federal government of Somalia with the support of the UN, AMISOM, UNSOM, International Committee, to continue generating, training, and resourcing a capable, efficient, and effective Somali national force that will ultimately take over the security responsibility in line with the revised Somali Transitional Plan and the national security architecture. The recent decisions of this Council to further ease the arms embargo on Somalia will contribute towards strengthening the capacity and capabilities of the Somali security forces. Madam President, we strongly condemn reported incident of civilian casualties, conflict-related sexual violence, which continues to disproportionately affect women and girls, grave violations against children, including abduction, recruitment, and use, killing and maiming that have been registered during the period under review. More effective measures must be taken to prevent these violations, consistent with international human rights law and international humanitarian law. We thus support the cause that all perpetrators of these crimes be identified and held accountable. Madam President, on the humanitarian situation, the A3+1 knows that Somalia has been impacted by triple threats of COVID-19 pandemic, desert locusts, and floods. These challenges have deepened Somalia humanitarian crisis. COVID-19 in particular has exacerbated pre-existing vulnerabilities, disrupted socio-economic gains, and affected livelihoods of ordinary Somalis. We commend the actions by the humanitarian partners for the expansion of their support to Somali authorities to address the impact of COVID-19. The A3+1 further notes that adverse impact of flooding due to climate change remain widespread in Somalia during the period under review. We are concerned that this situation will continue to exacerbate the displacement of people, food insecurity, outbreak of war-borne diseases, as well as to adversely affect the livelihoods of those made most vulnerable across the country. In this respect, Somalia requires the continued support of the international community and humanitarian partners to mitigate the impact of the triple threat. The A3+1 support the call by Secretary General for additional funding that is urgently needed to continue to deliver humanitarian assistance. We regret that the security situation remains a major constraint to humanitarian operations. We strongly condemn the recorded, albeit continued, violent incidents against humanitarian operations and providers, including recorded incidents that led to killings, abduction, and in some instances, the detention of humanitarian workers. Furthermore, we take note of the attack against journalists and violations of freedom of expression mentioned in the Secretary General report, and encourage Somali authorities to take the necessary measures to address these issues. As the A3+1, however, we do recognize the critical socio-economic challenges facing Somalia. It has negatively impacted the expansion of some security activities, including liberating more areas. In spite of these, we commend Somalia on the progress it has made to meet all structural benchmarks under the International Monetary Fund, IMF, review mission and extended credit facility. The A3+1 further welcome the supplement development policy financing operation from the World Bank to support the triple crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic, desert locusts, and floods. These support measures have ensured that the Somali economy remains resilient amid the ongoing challenges. Madam President, on the UN and AU missions, Niger, Tunisia, South Africa, and Sierra Leone commend the sustained commitment of the United Nations through UNSOM, UNSOS, AMISOM, and UNMAS, as well as that of the federal government, the federal member states of Somalia, and international partners for their continuing efforts and progress made in bringing stabilization, deepening federalism, and state building in Somalia. We are concerned the United Nations Trust Fund in support of Somalia and the Somali security forces are seriously underfunded. This will have a negative impact on AMISOM and the Somali Security Forces pertaining to the provisions of UNSOS, of social logistical support, training, mentoring, and equipment to counter the threat of IEDs. We appeal for more contribution to these trust funds, as the lack of funding may erode the gains made by Somalia and supported by United Nations and African Union missions. We urge a continued and strengthened working relationship between AMISOM and UNSOM to assist Somalia to take ownership of addressing its own security challenges as envisaged by the Somali Regional Plan. We look forward to the finalization of the updated Somali Regional Plan, which will guide the handing over of security responsibilities from AMISOM to Somalia security forces. We, however, reiterate that the withdrawal and eventual exit of AMISOM from Somalia should be condition-based, depending on the situation in the country. The A3+1 support continued presence of AMISOM and UNSOM in Somalia, as the current security situation remains volatile and is characterized by frequent terrorist attacks. In addition, we concur with the observations of Secretary General that the successful transition is contingent in Somalia having adequate institutions, a generation of forces, and enhancement of oversight, management, sustained capacities of Somali security services, including through financial, operational, and logistical support. More efforts must be directed to realization of these benchmarks. The A3+1 also recognizes the relevance of the conduct of regular assessment and reviews to the assistance provided to Somalia by United Nations and African Union. Niger, Tunisia, South Africa, and Grenadines wish to underline the critical importance of soliciting and taking into account the views of relevant key stakeholders on the African continent, including the African Union, IGAD, the TCC and PCCs, on the future of international support to Somalia beyond 2021. There can be no real progress in Somalia or elsewhere in the African continent without the active participation and contribution of its people in seeking solutions to African problems and silencing the guns in their continent. To conclude, Madam President, the A3+1 appreciate the continued efforts of regional, sub-regional, international organizations and community, including the UN, AU, EU, IGAD, among others, in bringing political stability to the Somalis and the region in support of Somali-led, Somali-owned peace, security, and peace-building processes. The A3+1. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of South Africa for his statement on behalf of the A3+1, and I now give the floor to the representative of Indonesia.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of Indonesia and Vietnam, the two member states of ASEAN at the United Nations Security Council. First, I would like to welcome His Excellency Muhammad Hussein Roble, Prime Minister of Somalia, to this meeting. I would also like to thank SRSG Swan, the AU Special Representative Madeira, and Ms. Zainab Hassam for their insightful briefing. We welcome the positive development in Somalia, particularly the continued dialogue among the federal and state leaders that end the political impasse since 2018. It is indeed only through continued dialogue in the spirit of unity and cooperation can Somalia tackle the political, security, and humanitarian challenges confronting it. We also welcome the appointment of His Excellency, the Prime Ministers, and the formation of his new cabinet. Having said that, I would like to highlight 3 points. First, the agreement reached by the FGS and the FMS regarding the modalities and timeline of the election is an important milestone. We noted that the electoral model constitutes a progress from the 2016 model, which expands the voting franchise and guarantees the 30% quota for women in the parliament. We are heartened by the general acceptance and civil society organization of the model. We look forward for further clarification on several aspects of the modalities and resolution of several outstanding issues. We hope that the electoral model can be implemented in a secure and peaceful manner based on the agreed timeline. It is also important to create a favorable environment and to step up protection measures needed for civilians in the electoral process. We would also like to reiterate the need for continued international support in state-building efforts, including strengthening of state institutions and constitutional review, which will hopefully bring long-term peace and prosperity in Somalia. We welcome, in this regard, the signing of the Development Cooperation Framework by the Government of Somalia and the United Nations, of which priorities are aligned with Somalia's National Development Plan. The second point is we remain concerned over the volatile security situation. Despite efforts by Somali security forces and AMISOM, Al-Shabaab continued to demonstrate its ability to conduct attacks, including those carried out using IED and high-profile suicide attacks. We once again condemn all recent attacks by Al-Shabaab and extend condolences to the government and the people of Somalia, particularly the family of the victims. We would like to reiterate that any such attack is unacceptable and that all perpetrators must be brought to justice. We are particularly concerned that Al-Shabaab continue to target Somali National Army in AMISOM on the covered areas in Lower Shabelle. We reiterate the importance of Somali-led update of the transition plan that will lay the foundation of security transition in Somalia, including the future international support. We also feel that it is crucial to continue force generation efforts as well as training and capacity building for the SNA. The third point is humanitarian situation in Somalia is concerning. The triple challenge of COVID-19, flooding, and desert locust has resulted in increased displacement and people in need of humanitarian assistance. We are concerned that insufficient funding and ongoing insecurity constitute major constraints to humanitarian efforts. We call on the international partners to scale up funding to support the humanitarian response plan and alleviate the suffering of Somali people. We condemn attacks against humanitarian workers and reiterate the importance of ensuring unimpeded humanitarian assistance and relief. Lastly, Madam President, we reaffirm our respect for Somali's sovereignty and territorial integrity and convey our utmost tribute to UNSOM, UNSOS, AMISOM, and all actors working to ensure lasting peace and stability in Somalia. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Indonesia for his statement on behalf of Indonesia and Vietnam, the ASEAN members on the Security Council. And I now invite the representative of Belgium to make a statement.
Thank you, Madam President. Prime Minister, Sir, Special Representatives, dear Ms. Hassan, dear colleagues, I would like to thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General, as well as the Special Representative of the Peace and Security Council of the African Union for their reports and their work. I would here like to reaffirm the full support of Belgium. Our thanks also extend to Ms. Hassan, whose courage and efforts go towards more inclusion. I'd like to discuss today the political situation, human rights issues, and the humanitarian situation, as well as recent security developments. Regarding the political situation, dear colleagues, Belgium has taken note of the choice by the authorities of an indirect electoral model for the 2020-2021 elections. We welcome the dialogue that has meant that this consensus could be reached. We appreciate the authorities' commitment to hold true universal suffrage elections in 2024-2025. We encourage them to do everything they can to ensure that these take place in the best conditions possible. We also commend their commitment to guarantee the participation of women in this process. We strongly encourage, indeed, the authorities to expand the democratic space in order to ensure the involvement of a large swathe of the population, including women, but also young people and displaced persons, so involve them in this decisive process for the future of the country. In this context, we once again express our concern regarding attacks against journalists as they carry out their work and as they exercise freedom of expression. These attacks and these obstacles, moreover, just because of their very existence, contribute to a lack of consensus and a lack of involvement of the people, especially vis-à-vis the authorities. Nonetheless, the appointment by the federal government of a special prosecutor to investigate murders of journalists gives us grounds to hope that justice will be done in this area. Once the elections have taken place, Belgium hopes to see cooperation between the federal government and the federal member states continue. Dialogue is necessary, even crucial, I would say, to shore up a well-functioning federal model. The revision of the constitution must also continue. Alongside these expectations and challenges, Belgium would like to applaud the government's adoption of a national policy on climate change. The link between climate change and peace and security was discussed on Friday last week during the first meeting of an informal group of experts of the Security Council on climate and security. Regarding human rights and the humanitarian situation, Belgium remains very concerned by the numerous serious violations of which children are the victims. These are documented in the report. We would underscore the importance of monitoring of the conclusions or follow-up to the conclusions of the Working Group on Children and Armed Conflict here. We would urge all parties to bring an end to these violations. Here we welcome the release of 33 children by the Somali security forces in August. Furthermore, Belgium would encourage the government to continue its efforts to ensure the enactment of legislation to combat several types of violations, such as the draft law on sexual violence. Here, we are very concerned by the introduction to the Parliament of a new text. This is clearly incompatible with Somalia's international commitments. We regret the fact, Madam, that the National Independent Human Rights Commission has still not been set up some 3 years after it was officially launched. This institution would nonetheless play a key role in monitoring human rights in Somalia. As to the humanitarian situation, dear colleagues, it remains very complicated. No one can ignore any longer the triple threat posed by COVID-19, floods, and the desert locust invasion. This comes over and above existing vulnerabilities. In 2021, it's likely that 4 million Somalis will need humanitarian assistance. Belgium has further increased its contribution to the UN system, and I would call for broad support for the Somali people. Now, finally, a few words about the security sector. Al-Shabaab is the primary threat to the security and stability of the country. We strongly condemn the criminal actions of that group. The development and deployment of the Somali army is crucial to contain this threat and protect the population. Combating Al-Shabaab must nonetheless be conducted whilst respecting human rights and international humanitarian law. Belgium welcomes the consultative process underway to revise the transition plan. This document will be crucial, on the one hand, to guide Somalia, assisted by its partners, to take back control of security, and on the other hand, it will enable a reconfiguration of AMISOM. The independent assessment of AMISOM will enable the Council to have different options regarding the reconfiguration. We hope that the African Union will get on board quickly with joint considerations on this. In conclusion, I would like to remind you of the EU's support for Somalia, be this through financing for AMISOM or the EUTM or EU CAP missions or the maritime anti-piracy operation called Atalanta. Assistance for institutional capacity building is also very important. Once security is re-established, the Somali authorities should be in a position to offer its people basic services and freedoms to which they legitimately aspire. And for this too, we will stand shoulder to shoulder with our Somali friends. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Belgium for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Dominican Republic.
Thank you very much, Madam President. First and foremost, I'd like to warmly welcome Hossein Robe, the Minister from Somalia. We'd like to thank Mr. James Swan, Mr. Francisco Madeira, and Mr. Sanib Hassan for the detailed and very helpful information provided. Madam President, the Dominican Republic applauds the end of the stalemate between the federal government and member federated states, and we commend the efforts of the special representative and international partners to promote cooperation and thereby contribute to making progress towards implementing national priorities. We also commend the ratification of the electoral model agreement and hope that it will be implemented in a peaceful, transparent, and inclusive manner. However, we are concerned by the delays in the constitutional review process, and we hope that the impasse will be overcome in order to conclude this important stage of the process. We recognize the commitment of the federal government to assign a women-only bench to thereby ensure the 30% quota, as well as the efforts to train women undertaken by UNSOM, UN Women, and the Ministry of Women's Affairs, as well as civil society organizations. Despite the progress, we regret the elimination of the women's quota by the Chamber of Representatives for the draft electoral law of Somalilandia. We understand that better or greater participation of women in various areas of public and political exercise is crucial. And along these lines, we'd like to recognize the efforts undertaken with a view to raising awareness about the need to include young people in key processes of decision making and in informal and formal civic spaces in Somalia. Madam President, we commend the fact that the transition plan for Somalia is underway and steps are being taken in order to establish security conditions as necessary. We hope that the transition will take place taking into account the required parameters and thereby ensuring that the authorities have the necessary tools to shoulder the responsibilities being transferred to them. However, all these efforts could be affected by the very serious security situation in Somalia. And we take this opportunity to once again condemn the attacks perpetrated by the terrorist group Al-Shabaab against civilians, government civil servants, security forces, some of which have used IEDs. We'd also like to express our concern by the worsening humanitarian situation, which has been exacerbated by factors such as political and economic instability and climate change, all of which is then further framed by the pandemic, locusts, and floods. All of these factors have resulted in an alarming deepening of humanitarian needs in the country, where more than 50% of the population requires assistance. Somalia is, moreover, one of the countries that's the most vulnerable to climate change effects, with very limited capacity to address the challenges of climate change due to the conflict. We encourage the international community to contribute to the Humanitarian Assistance Fund in Somalia with a view to saving lives and meeting the needs of the most vulnerable. To conclude, we would like to highlight the role of UNSOS, AMISOM, UNSOM, and at the same time, we'd also like to acknowledge all actors whose actions promote peace and stability in this country. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Dominican Republic for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Madam President, we welcome the participation in today's video conference of the Prime Minister of Somalia, Mohamed Hussein Roble. We thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General, James Swan, the Special Representative of the African Union and Head of AMISOM, Francisco Madeira, and also the representative of the Somali non-governmental organization, Zainab Hassan, for their substantive briefings. We've also closely read the latest quarterly Secretary General's report. The most important thing for Somalia in the near future is the national elections that will start on the 1st of December. We welcome the broad consensus achieved in the country on the model for the voting in this election. We hope that in the coming days, Mogadishu will also be able to resolve the outstanding issues with the federal states, including those on the formation of electoral committees in those federal states, and the main one guaranteeing safety at polling stations. We call on African peacekeepers and UN staff to make a substantive contribution here, and also on regional players to maintain their commitment to the commitments that they have taken on. We also note with satisfaction the federal government of Somalia's achievement of progress in the political dialogue with the federal states against the background of preparations for the election. We hope that the government will soon be able to renew negotiations with Somaliland and to continue normalization of relations with Jubaland. We hope to see further progress in work on reviewing the federal constitution as well. We agree that further progress would be helped by the institutionalization of this dialogue. We encourage Special Representative Swan to continue his efforts towards this end. We've also noted the views on two draft laws on sexual violence contained in the Secretary General's report. These are laws being considered by the Federal Parliament and the Parliament of Somaliland. We think that all of the concerns connected with these documents should be addressed while strictly respecting the sovereignty and political independence of Somalia. We must note that the security situation in the country remains tense. Al-Shabaab is continuing its terrorist incursions, making use of the tactic of political murders and utilizing ever more sophisticated IEDs. We note the group's ability to adapt to the pressure that is applied to it. There are also serious concerns at Al-Shabaab's recent activity in Mogadishu and also in the federal states Hirshabelle and Galmudug. Against this background, AMISOM remains a key component of counterterrorism. The role of peacekeepers is growing, particularly in light of the forthcoming elections. We look forward to the completion of a renewed plan for transferring responsibility for security within the country from AMISOM to the Somali National Army. At the same time, we are against attempts to force the reduction of the mission. We continue to think that any decision on the withdrawal of African peacekeepers from Somalia should take into account progress in the training of the Somali National Army and also the building of a single national security architecture. We hope that efforts in these areas will be helped by the independent view of the international assistance given to Somalia for its security, as stipulated by Resolution 2520. We encourage the group of independent experts to work together with regional players, first and foremost the African Union. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Estonia. Sven?
Thank you, Madam President. I join others in thanking the briefers for their insightful overviews and welcoming the Prime Minister of Somalia to today's meeting. The coming months will be crucial for Somalia, and allow me to reiterate Estonia's support for the country and its people. Estonia welcomes that an agreement was achieved on the modalities of the elections, which was accepted by all key Somali stakeholders. Moving forward, we emphasize the importance of timely, secure, inclusive, and transparent elections. Estonia urges the implementation of the 30% female quota and ensuring that marginalized groups are included. Additionally, as Somalia prepares for parliamentary and presidential elections, now more than ever, freedom of expression and the press must be protected. While we welcome the progress that has been made, Estonia regrets that the upcoming elections could not be a one-person, one-vote model, as was previously envisioned by Somali authorities and international community alike. In order to ensure that Somalia is making progress in its democratization process, we strongly support the development of an agreed pathway to one-person, one-vote elections in 2024-25. Furthermore, for the democratization process to proceed, we would highly support institutionalization of the consultations between the federal government and federal member states as to make sure we would avoid the previous impasse. In addition, Estonia underlies the need to put in place measures and institutions to protect human rights. In this regard, we reiterate the importance of establishing the Independent National Human Rights Commission, which has a key role to play in promoting and protecting human rights. We also remain deeply concerned about the sexual intercourse-related crimes bill and reiterate our call on Somalia to respect its international human rights obligations and discuss the original sexual offences bill in Parliament. The security situation remains a major challenge, and I condemn in the strongest possible terms the continuing attacks by Al-Shabaab. The impact of conflict on civilians, including women and children, is devastating and a cause of grave concern. The coming months will be crucial for agreeing the way forward for the end goal of Somalia taking full responsibility for its security. In this regard, we welcome the progress the federal government of Somalia has made in updating the transition plan, and we are looking forward to the final product, which should be realistic in its timelines, tasks, and goals. We are also looking forward to the independent assessment and urge all key stakeholders to engage with the independent panel. Estonia emphasizes that a comprehensive approach to security is important. Al-Shabaab cannot be defeated only through military means. Therefore, institution building and supporting activities alongside military operations remain the key. Estonia is deeply concerned about the dire humanitarian situation. Following the serious humanitarian situation resulting from the triple threat of COVID-19, locust infestation, and floods, Somalia is again bracing for potential drought conditions in 2021. Routine spikes in humanitarian needs call for a more strategic approach. The resilience of Somali people must remain a priority. I would like to conclude by expressing Estonia's gratitude and support to the UN personnel in Somalia, AMISOM, and Somali security forces for their efforts, commitment, and sacrifices to bring peace and stability to Somalia. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Estonia for his statement. And I think someone has an open mic. Someone has an open mic.
Madam President, it's closed now. Now it's China who has a mic open, but now it's closed.
I now invite the representative of China to make a statement.
主席女士，欢迎卢布莱总理出席。
Madam President, we welcome the Prime Minister of Somalia to participation in the meeting. We welcome Madrea, the Special Representative of CC, and SRSG for their briefings. And a new cabinet has been put in place, and the Somalian security situation is still fragile. There's a long way to go to achieve peace and stability in Somalia. I would like to emphasize the following 3 points. First, steadily take forward the political process. China welcome the federal government and its federal member states reached consensus on the model of elections and encourage all parties to achieve the final smooth holding of the elections and will follow the agreement they have achieved. And we call on the Somalian parties to put interests of state and people above everything and maintain dialogue momentum and enhance political trust, complete the state building, and actively take forward the constitutional review and other priorities. And achieve, secondly, the jointly defend security, stability. Somalians, the terrorist activities are still frequent and the security situation is worrying. We appreciate UNSOM, AMISOM, and the efforts that have been made and contribution they have made. And Security Council's mandate, they did the independent assessment important so as to provide comprehensive, objective, and transparent basis on which to make the arrangement. And we also support the reform of the AMISOM and will provide the preparations for the transition. And the international community will help the Somalian side to strengthen its cooperation to provide steady and continued financial guarantee for the transition. Third, to increase the input into the development and humanitarian relief following the long time of war and turbulences. The economic development is quite lagged behind, and it faced with long-term humanitarian challenges. Development is the important basis for solving all the problems, and also the expectations of Somalian government and people. The international community should help a Somalian government and people to achieve its development program and help Somalia develop its economy, improve its livelihood, and release its natural resources and labor potentials. And China has always supported the Somalian government in defending its sovereignty and territorial integrity. I have supported Somalia to embark on the road of peace, stability, and development at an early date. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, China has provided several shipments of emergency anti-epidemic materials to Somalia and to show our solidarity with the Somalian people to tide over the difficulties, and will help Somalia in its economic reconstruction through concrete cooperation projects. I thank you, Madam President.
representative of Germany.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and thanks a lot to the briefers for their important work and their substantive briefings. I am very happy that the Prime Minister of Somalia is with us today. Allow me to make a couple of remarks. The first one is on the electoral process. It is positive that the political dialogue between the federal government and all federal member states has been restored. Both sides need to continue this dialogue in order to achieve tangible progress. We regret that the electoral model adopted has fallen short of our expectations and the government's promises. This is a point we have discussed at length in the last meeting of the Security Council. Still, credible, transparent, and fair elections remain possible, and they remain key to the state-building process in Somalia. In this context, we hope and expect that the electoral process is conducted in a peaceful manner and that the agreed women's quota of 30% is implemented. My second remark is on the security situation. As the overall security situation remains volatile, the security of the elections in the coming weeks needs to be a top priority. We encourage all stakeholders to increase their efforts and to finalize their work on the update and implementation of the security transition plan. Cooperation between federal government and federal member states continues to be key in this regard. We take note that preparations such as the unveiled draft of the National Election Security Plan are underway. Also, the progress on institutional capacity building activities through training and strategic advice is very much welcomed. We would also like to underscore the importance of increased Somali ownership and the effective coordination with international and regional partners in the security sector. AMISOM continues to play a pivotal role for Somalia's security. We see this in many instances. Nevertheless, reflecting on how to reshape this mission remains crucial. The nature of existing threats may change, but we must not neglect our common goal, which is for Somalia to take over the full responsibility for its own security. In this context, we consider the ongoing independent assessment an important opportunity for all partners, including Somali authorities, TCCs, and the African Union. And we believe that all partners should actively and constructively contribute. Also, we are looking forward to an open and frank discussion at the security event organized jointly by the European Union, the African Union, and Somalia on the 30th of November. On human rights, we are deeply concerned about bills recently passed in Somaliland that weaken the protection of survivors of sexual violence and that do not comply with international human rights. This has been mentioned by other delegations, and we are deeply worried by this. It is the responsibility of the state authorities to protect the rights of survivors of sexual violence. This is why we also call for the reinstatement of Somaliland's original rape and sexual offense law. We further call for the 2018 Federal Sexual Offences Bill to be enacted, both of which comply with international human rights standards. Likewise, we are concerned about the reported cases of conflict-related sexual violence, with members of government institutions being reported as perpetrators. Such behavior is unacceptable. However, we are pleased to see Training programs focusing on responding to such heinous crimes were provided to the Somali police force and to 5 state police services, as well that a follow-up action plan was already developed. We are also concerned about an increasing number of attacks against journalists, many of which continue to be arbitrarily arrested and detained. Freedom of expression and the press are always essential and must be protected, but are of particular importance in the run-up to the elections. We welcome the federal government's appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate killings of journalists and urge that perpetrators be held accountable. Lastly, I would like to make a remark on climate and security. In Somalia, the impact of climate change-driven environmental shocks is becoming more and more evident. Floods and droughts are just examples. SRSG Swan, you kindly briefed the informal experts group on climate and security on these dynamics. We would like to once again thank you for shedding some light on this important issue. We also appreciate that the Secretary General's report takes note of these factors and commend you, SRSG Swan, for the excellent work that you and your team is already conducting on the ground in this regard. We encourage your mission and the UN system at large to systematically include climate-related risk factors in your analysis. Enhance your efforts to address these. Germany stands ready to support the UN in these efforts. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Germany for his statement. We have heard the last council member inscribed to speak. It is now my distinct honor to give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Mohammed Hussein Roble, Prime Minister of Somalia. Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and greeting from Baydhaba, Somalia. Allow me to congratulate the permanent representative of St. Vincent and Grenadines, Ambassador Ronda King, for her assumption of the presence of the Council for the month of November. We wish you a very success in fulfilling your mandate. I would like to take this opportunity to deeply thank all delegations from their condolences and sympathies after the recent passing of our former Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Omar Arter Khalid. He has left an indelible mark in our history during its toughest moment, and we will certainly remember him for his brilliant leadership during Somalia Security Council presidency in steering the work of the UN Security Council first ever meeting in Africa in January 1972. The Federal Republic of Somalia reiterates its unwavering commitment to continue working closely with the UN mission in Somalia alongside AMISOM to help it accomplish its mandate. I therefore extend to the Special Representative of the Secretary General and Special Representative of the Chairperson of African Union for their briefing. Also, I would like to thank the Somali Civil Society briefer, Madam Zainab Hassan, for her briefing. Madam President Mohammed Abdullahi Farmajo signed the electoral agreement on indirect election on 12th November this year, which was passed by both houses of parliament on 26th September of this year, marking the culmination of inclusive political agreement reached in Mogadishu by the leadership of federal member states and the federal government of Somalia. The electoral timetable and the procedures announced by National Consultative Council on 1st October 2020 will guide the implementation of this election. In line with the agreed open timetable, the elections of the upper house and that for the House of the People are expected to take place by the end of this year. This will be followed by the election of the Speaker of Parliament and the election of the President between 1st January and 8 February 2021. We reiterate that the federal government of Somalia is committed to holding fair, free, and timely elections. Since the preparation and logistics for the election require significant funding for operational and security arrangements, we seek our partners' renewed commitment to timely and adequate technical and financial support for relevant institutions and bodies tasked with organizing and overseeing the 2020 and 2021 elections. The political agreement reached between the leadership of federal government of Somalia and federal member states was clear in that the 30% women quota should be safeguarded and a mechanism to ensure women participation is developed. The federal government of Somalia will continue to advocate for the full representation of women at all decision-making levels. Allow me to stress that the 30% women quota should be seen as a minimum requirement to be attained. The Somali Women Charter, which was endorsed by the federal government of Somalia, clearly states that the aim should be 50% women representation. Whilst a one-person, one-vote election could not be achieved at this moment in time, it continues to remain the ambition and aspiration of all Somalis. For the realization of this goal, the federal government of Somalia formed a technical team consisting of members from the Ministry of Interior, National Independent Election Commission, and representatives from the Office of the Prime Minister to draft a roadmap for universal suffrage election of one person, one vote to take place in 2025. Let me take the opportunity to inform you that technical committee has already drafted the roadmap and it will be presented to the cabinet for endorsement. In addition to that, my government will consult with the federal member states leaders and other stakeholders before the roadmap will be presented to the federal parliament for adoption. This is why the federal government of Somalia, in collaboration with the National Independent Election Commission, has also started preparation for a one-person, one-vote election to take place in 2024-25. Madam President, our security sector reform is undergoing continuous progress. Our comprehensive security sector reform continues to gain momentum, having streamlined and standardized Somali National Armed Force. The government continues to generate and integrate forces, enabling us to continue degrading the terrorist groups and liberate more areas. We are in the finishing stage of longer-term Somali transition plan meant to hand over the responsibility to protect Somali citizens to the Somali National Armed Force as the AMISOM peacekeeping troops continue to transit out of the country. I take this opportunity to pay tribute to the troop and police contributing countries for their unwavering support and sacrifices in restoring peace and security in Somalia. Our Somali National Armed Force, brave young men and women, continue to effectively hold the areas previously liberated from Al-Shabaab, paving the way for successful AMISOM drawdown and its eventual exit from Somalia. However, there is an urgent need to empower and invest more in the advancement, training, mobility, and equipment of the Somali National Army. We go on record again that the army embargo is clearly hindering the capability of the Somali National Army to be able to effectively eradicate terrorist groups from our country. Madam President, Somali economics and financial sector reform initiatives have been key priorities for the federal government of Somalia to alleviate the unsustainable national debt burden from the Somali people. Through great national effort and in partnership with the bilateral and multilateral partners, Somalia completed successive economic reform progress guided by the International Money Fund to reach the decision point under the highly in-depth Poor Countries Initiative. This was a huge achievement, which is now followed by a sequel program, the Extended Credit Facilities, which continues to focus on strengthening public financial management, raising domestic revenue toward fiscal sustainability, managing expenditure to a sustainable level, good governance, financial sector reform, and overall putting in place laws, regulations in institutionalized good governance and sustainable economic management. We are determined to remain on the right reform trajectory to reach the completion point and hopefully attain complete debt forgiveness. This, coupled with the lesson we have learned and the systems and processes we have built through the economic reform journey, should lead Somalia on the road to sustainable development, opportunity, and prosperity. With regards to justice reform, the lower house of parliament has approved on 16 November 2020 the nominees for the Judicial Services Commission. The commission is a vital constitutionally mandate body that advises the federal government of Somalia on the administration of justice. We are currently in the final stage of also presenting to the Parliament the list of nominees for the Anti-Corruption Commission on Human Rights Promotion and Protection. The Cabinet in 2018 strongly approved the draft sexual offences bill and submitted it to the Parliament. This legislation is not new to Somalia. The regions of Somaliland and Puntland have already adopted similar legislation. Nonetheless, our government remains committed to advancing human rights and the protection of women and girls in Somalia. To this end, we are aware of the controversy that has surrounded the sexual offences bill, and we will engage in dialogue with the Parliament and religious scholars to discuss how we can move to this vital legislation forward. The federal government of Somalia is cognizant of the important role played by the media in our state building process. I recently met a group of Somali journalists with the representatives of the Reporters Without Borders to reassure them of my commitment to protect the space for the media to provide information to our citizens freely. We have enacted a media law which provides guidelines on media operations and activities, while also protecting the rights of the media and journalists working in the country. We have informed the communications unit under the Office of the President, the Office of the Prime Minister, and the Minister of Information to ease access to the journalists who require information on government plans and activities. Madam President, Somalia has been grappling with cyclic climate emergencies as the country oscillated between floods and droughts between seasons. We are now faced with the worst medical crisis in the century. Somalia's weak health infrastructure and limited resources have curtailed our containment efforts of the COVID-19. The COVID-19 is threatening to derail our reform efforts. COVID-19 poses a serious security challenge to a context that is already marked by fragility. In Somalia, training by partners have been suspended to stop the spread of the disease. There is a high risk of security personnel screening, catching the contagion. Protective gears are in short supply.
France, your mic is open.
The government is distributing masks among the frontline officers, but this is far from being sufficient. Somali National Armed Forces are also involved in the public awareness campaigns against the disease. The global shutdown has seen a ban on both international and local flights, imposition of partial curfew, waiving of taxes on essential food and non-food items, among other measures. And while food prices have leaded, remittances have significantly decreased, and trading activities have declined considerably. All these factors have caused a reduction of domestic revenue. Families will need to be supported, and small and medium business enterprises caution against the negative impacts associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. To conclude, Somalia's challenges remain significant, including our vulnerability to extreme weather, COVID-19, the long-term demand of the state building and tackling an active and vicious terrorist group. All this require long-term plans of building and resourcing legitimate institutions to address structural, political, and legacy issues of corruption. We are certainly on the right path, which will enable us to achieve peace and security for all Somalis, while changing the perception from poverty to sustainable development and from fragility to resilience. Thank you, Excellency, and thank you, Madam President.
I thank the Honorable Prime Minister Robo for his statement and for being with us today. Excellencies, this concludes the live broadcast portion of this meeting.